what kind of deterrence do you think would be acceptable to both the British people and that the SDP would bring in? So, for example, there's lots of talks about, with regards to illegal immigration, how people would go about stopping the boats. So we've had Labour talk about smashing the gangs, which of course doesn't seem to be working. The numbers have increased from the already high numbers that the Tory party presided over. And I would say you can find it quite commonly amongst people to say, well, just turn them back, take them back to France. Do you know what would work? Would you talk about bringing back a Rwanda plus turning people back to the French shores? What do you think the SDP would do if you were parachuted into government overnight?
Well, it's published on the SDP website, so you can have a look. But basically, I think we do know what would work, and nothing that any other party proposes will work for various reasons. What will work so they're separate things. I mean, there's immigration in general, which is immigration policy, legal migration. There's overstayers and all sorts of other things. But the sort of the visceral problem, the acute problem is people just wandering into your state unannounced, uninvited, unsolicited, and that's the Channel migrant crisis, which occasionally causes tragedy as well, where people drown. So how do we solve the Channel migrant crisis? People just rocking up and arriving. Well, what you don't do is propose things like pushing back boats in the Channel. You can't do that. For various reasons. One of the reasons is that the French won't accept your interdiction of boats in their waters. So when you get to French waters, what do? You have to have cooperation. You won't get cooperation with France because it's not in France's interest to have these migrants in their state. They prefer they just put them onto Britain. They don't these migrants in their jurisdiction. So that won't happen. And also, as a point I've made before, and I've made to Richard Tice personally, that I don't think such a policy would survive the first large capsize. I don't think if you've got 80 people on a boat and you pushed it back and it capsized and 70 of them drowned, I'm sorry, your policy must end there. It's not going to happen. You cannot possibly pursue a policy that would risk that or cause that. You can't. It's beyond the bounds of what is possible. Keir Starmer's thing about just toughening up police involvement in gangs, well, that's just pie in the sky. They do that anyway. I mean, the Tories have done that for a long time. The British authorities, both military and police, have done it, and they've cooperated with the French and Interpol on it for a long time. And it's got them nowhere, and they can't seem to deal with it. So that doesn't all Keir Starmer's doing there is calling it something different. Border Commando, whatever he calls it. So that's not going to do it. But the SDP policy would do it, which is that anyone arriving unsolicited on the south coast would be picked up, taken to Brize Norton and flown to Ascension Island, and they'd be detained in an offshore facility. And they would be detained there until they go either back to where they came from or to a third country. And it wouldn't just be Rwanda or Albania, it'd be any country. But one of the only place they would not be allowed to come to is Britain. Now, the point I make about that is that if you implemented that, your interdiction rate would be 100%. I mean, it's perfectly within the capacity of the authorities to intercept every single boat. 100% of boats coming across illegally would be intercepted, and 100% of people arriving unsolicited illegally would be shipped off to Ascension. So the point I make about that is that the flow would stop overnight. Literally, it would collapse overnight. The deal is a really excellent deal at the moment for migrants, because what you do is you pay €5,000, and for that €5,000, you get almost probable. The grant rate is so high in this country, 85% on most categories. You're almost certain to obtain for that €5,000 permanent access to the British social wage forever for you and your family, because you first and then family reunions the rest of your family. So it's just an incredible bargain. I mean, it's like As an investment, it's a colossal return. Now, if you incentivize people to such an extent, you shouldn't be surprised that people take you up on the offer and do it. That's what they're doing. So I've always said you need to change the incentives. Now, if the incentive is that you get shipped to Ascension Island, you stay there, possibly for years, waiting to go back to where you came from or to another place, you are not going to part with your 5,000 euros. You're just not going to do it. No sane person would do that. So that is the policy. And I've done interview after interview after interview. That is the policy, that you would stop this illegal flow through. That's how you do it. Now, in order to do it, you have to remove yourself from the post-war protocols that the country signed up to. And legally, it's perfectly possible to do that. You just disincorporate them. We've incorporated this law into British law, but Parliament is still, well, people are sovereign, but Parliament can take the action necessary to remove ourselves from those protocols. And so if you dismantle a legal architecture which prevents you from controlling your border, it's a prerequisite to do that. If you get rid of that, then you can do what we suggest, and you would instantly get control of the border. Now, you then get onto we discussed earlier about why certain things are the case, and demoralization and the collapse in self-assertion are the cultural causes of this. I'm asked a lot, why don't governments do this? And I don't want to be flippant, but basically it's because they don't want to. That's the answer. They don't want to. During the pandemic, you saw our government do lots of things that were quite dramatic and draconian and emergency, and they did them because they wanted to. In this case, the political class don't want to get a control of the border in this way, and that's why it doesn't happen. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that we can't do it. We certainly could do it if we wanted to do it. And as I say, if you had a leader like Lee Kuan Yew post-Brexit, a lot of this had been done a long time ago.
We've spoken about the ability to be able to do this, and indeed we've seen Australia do it, albeit with lower numbers, but a much bigger bit of water that was being crossed, and they were able to, as you say, collapse the numbers overnight. And so they have a handful as opposed to tens of thousands of people being detained on an island offshore. And we've also spoken a bit about how you forecasting that there could be a real shift to the right in Europe. And I can't help but think it's because ultimately those who are governing at the moment keep on trying to find more inventive ways of keeping them out and not listening to the concerns of, let's call them, the populists. And it seems, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's saying this, that if you actually just listen to the concerns and try to deal with those and deal with the problem, that you might stop people flocking to these parties for a start. But the other thing is the longer you keep something down for, the longer you hold that balloon underwater, it's going to find a way of coming up eventually. And the deeper you hold it, the more violent its reaction. And I suppose I've been thinking a little bit about a Rudyard Kipling poem, where he always seems to have these poems which can capture the psyche of the British people. And anyway, there's this one verse in called The Beginnings, and he says, let me get it up actually, because I don't want to get it wrong. He said, their voices were even and low, their eyes were level and straight. There was neither sign nor show when the English began to hate. And the reason why I bring this up is I am a little bit concerned by a couple of things. So number one, we've got this balkanization going on, which we talked about. We've now got people feeling a sense of cultural loss. On the other side, I do find it commendable that it's being spoken about, but Eric Kaufmann is talking about how this race taboo seems to govern most of Western society. And in many ways, you can see why it's there, because you don't want there to be ethnic strife ultimately. And you would hope that actually by removing it, you can make more sensible policy decisions. But I'm a little bit concerned that through the Overton window shifting, which I think it is, and if the current elite class just keeps that balloon underwater even longer and doesn't listen to the concerns and keeps juicing mass immigration and keeps the borders open to illegal immigrants and keeps providing people jumping the queue for various public services before those who are legally here, that the liberal tolerance, which was part of and has been part of the British mindset for a few centuries, if and when that goes, that we could see some, not just that low intensity civil war John Gray talks about, but some seriously nasty stuff on the streets. I don't know if you or the political class, I suppose, that you find yourselves rubbing shoulders with, or at least challenging, do you think there's a concern about that, or does no one think that's a way that it'll go?
I think that we're going to have to stop agreeing on things. I think it's very much put, John. Yeah, no, I'm quite complacent. I think there are some people in the political class that understand it. Probably conservatives like Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger understand it. I think Maurice Glassman understands it on the Labour side. Paul Embry understands it on the Labour side. But I think far too many of the Liberals, and they're all basically liberal progressives, which dominate, they don't really see it, and they sort of would tend to double down. And I think there's a strong whiff of Kuhnianism. The Thomas Kuhn, the science philosopher, talked about people's reluctance to give up their cherished beliefs and theories, and particularly in the social sphere, the people don't like to accept they're wrong. So a lot of the liberalism, as liberalism fails in front of us, it's the liberal paradox. Very, very simply, the liberal paradox: if you run liberal progressive policies, you'll destroy your society with those policies, and you'll end up with a society that isn't liberal. That's the paradox. It's not difficult to understand really if you just pay attention. But some of these people will go to their graves holding on, rather like the communists, just saying, well, it hasn't been done right, or the problem is the far right, or the problem is this, or the problem is that, and they just don't accept that their own policies are the root of the problems. So I don't see a dawning of a realization among the ruling class necessarily. I think actually Brexit was a good example where post-Brexit, it's just been they haven't taken any lesson from Brexit, none at all, nothing. They haven't. And if Brexit was Brexit was a proxy in some respects. There were two things in Brexit: it was sovereignty and immigration. But it was because you didn't vote on immigration in Brexit, it was a proxy vote for immigration. It was obviously an important issue. What did the Tories do? Just double down, just increase it even more. So the capacity of the elite to learn and adapt, I would say, is pretty low. But I do think you're absolutely spot on about the dangers, because it is the metaphor of whether you quote Kipling, and that's a very famous poem, the one you read out there, whether it's that or the other metaphor, which is which is one that economists like, which is the brick on a bit of elastic. You pull on the elastic and the brick doesn't move, and suddenly it moves and hits you in the face. That's sort of where we are. I think that's the challenge we face, and in a way, a political project like the Social Democratic Party, speaking truths and being candid and honest about the data about some of these things, and saying some things that people find a little bit uncomfortable but need saying. It's part of the pressure valve. It's part of releasing a pressure valve, which is necessary in the way that any election should be necessary to correct things. But the ruling class had better start listening, and I don't see huge evidence that that's happening, and it is a concern. But on the other hand, you do need a political project, and there are a lot of think tanks and a lot of journalists and a lot of very good people saying things that are important. Eric Kaufman is one of them. David Goodhart's another. But you do need a political vehicle in the end. You need to have something where people go in a polling booth and actually elect someone, and that's why we're sort of continuing doing what we're doing.